I hope you're all doing well and you've had a nice night. I have a pleasure now to introduce Dr. Maria Luisa Perez Cañado. And she's full professor at the Department of English Philology at the University of Jaén, Spain, where she also rector's delegate for European University and Language Policy. Her research interests are in applied linguistics, bilingual education, and new technologies in language teaching. Her work has appeared in over 120 scholarly journals and edited volumes. So, Maria, we are pleased to listen to your conference. And the subject today is Looking Back to Move Forward, a research-based wish list for the future of bilingual education. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Muy buenos días. Let me begin first and foremost by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to the organizers for the invitation to be with you all today. No better way to wrap up the academic year than here at ARDAA. So thank you so much for having me. J'adore la France, j'adore Paris. Et je suis vraiment ravie d'être avec vous aujourd'hui pour discuter sur où est-ce qu'on est et où est-ce qu'on va dans le cadre de l'investigation en éducation bilingue. Donc, today, we are going to be focusing in this talk on bilingual education, concretely on CLIL, which, as you know, stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. That's right. We have our acronym in Spanish, el AICLE, el aprendizaje integrado de contenido de lengua extranjera. On l'a en français aussi, le MIL, l'enseignement des métiers pour l'intégration d'une langue étrangère. And it's basically considered to be the European approach to bilingual education. And it entails teaching subject content through the target language in order to maximize meaningful exposure to it. And CLIL has been largely considered to be the most important innovation in language teaching in the past 25 years. And now there is a consensus that it is an unstoppable train. There's no going back. It's left the station, so it is incumbent upon us to do whatever it takes to ensure that train does not derail, and we allow its passengers, our students, to reach their destination safely. And the track record we now have of solid empirical evidence tells us that over the past 20-plus years, that metaphorical train has been chugging along quite nicely. And in the past, I would say half a decade, that train has been exploring new venues, new pastures, exciting new directions, because in CLIL, as Bob Dylan would put it, the times, they are a-changin'. And you know, I really realized this as I was preparing this talk, because I looked back at this article I published, my goodness, back in 2012, time flies, on the past, present, and future of CLIL research in Europe. And I thought, my goodness, how things have changed. It's still okay, but it requires a revisiting. So I was delighted when the ARDAA organizers asked me to share with you my view on where the future of CLIL research is going, because it gives me the opportunity to completely revamp and rethink this article. And those times I mentioned are changing because from the famous 4 C's propounded by Coyle, are you familiar with them? The classic 4 C's. I contend in a recent article that we are now moving towards what I call the new 4 C's in CLIL research. The first C started out as what I call the CLIL craze. When we started researching on CLIL back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, my goodness, everything was peachy. Doesn't matter if teachers had a B1 level, that was enough. Not a single thing wrong was found with CLIL. It offered such shiny new promises that everything was painted in the most positive light possible. In fact, if we had to summarize this phase with a WhatsApp emoji, it would undoubtedly be the Spanish dancing flamenca, okay? Everything was wonderful. Now, the problem with these initial investigations is that they were methodologically compromised. Because, for example, to give you a case in point, they didn't bother to guarantee the homogeneity between CLIL and non-CLIL groups that were compared. And CLIL groups are normally better at baseline, so results were skewed. From there, we have unfortunately transitioned to what I call the period of CLIL critique. And now everything is looking much more negative and dismal and pessimistic. This is embodied especially, don't know if you've read him, Anthony Bruton at the University of Sevilla in southern Spain. And also in many newspaper articles, which in our context are popping up on a weekly basis, slamming CLIL. The problem with these articles is that they're based on opinions or isolated cases, which are thus not scientific, valid, or generalizable. So this has led us to the third C, a period of CLIL conundrum, where we don't know what to think anymore. And we are currently positioned within an intense CLIL controversy, which is playing itself out in the major journals of the field, with articles being tossed back and forth between the believers and the haters. And the problem with this phase is, well, you know what? To be honest with you, I don't think there is a problem. I think this debate is very healthy, and it has infused the field with life. Science is a collective endeavor, and our detractors also signpost the way forward. They tell us what we need to be looking at in greater depth. But it is true that we need to bring that metaphorical pendulum to a standstill and not be Pollyannas where everything is peachy, or Scrooges who are overly negative, but rather what Rosling terms, and I love this word, possibilists. Now, a possibilist is someone who's not a drama queen, right? Who doesn't harbor an overly positive or negative outlook on things, but who is guided by facts. And we now have a track record of facts to be guided by. So hopefully using those facts, we will usher in a new era, the era not of the 4 C's, but of the 5 C's. And we will proceed to a period of CLIL conciliation or concord or calmness. I have no idea what the 5th C will be, but it will hopefully be a period which will entail a more balanced view of the research panorama. And in ushering in that 5th C today, I want to make my contribution by focusing on the 10 hottest topics right now on the CLIL research agenda. And for each one, I'm going to go right ahead and canvas the past, present, and future, as I did in that article over a decade ago. So I'm going to be telling you where we started, where we currently stand, and where it is we need to go, right? So if anyone here is interested in doing research on CLIL, I don't know, a master's dissertation, a PhD, these are some of the burning issues you might want to be focusing on. So for each one, you will have a then, a now, and a future. And then I'll finish up by tossing it back to you. I'll ask you a few questions, see if you've been listening, and I'll extract the broader takeaways of the entire talk. Sound okay? You ready? All right, let's hit it then. Okay, here are our 10 issues. Just like there's a top 10 for Netflix, yeah? There's also a top 10 of hot topics on the CLIL research agenda. Let's take them one by one. The first one I call the shifting role of languages in CLIL. Now, where did we start out 20 plus years when CLIL was starting to be implemented? Well, not a real pretty picture. Our teachers had, in many cases, an insufficient language proficiency. In Andalusia, the south of Spain, where I live and teach, our teachers only had to accredit a B1 to be able to teach bilingually. And the worst part is it was considered enough, although there were concerns voiced for the possible detrimental impact. Also, in many monolingual contexts like Spain, students did not have enough exposure, extramural exposure to English, because we dub everything, yeah? And even teachers who had a high level, C1, even C2, we found that their language did not sound natural. It sounded textbookish, 19th century-ish, obsolete. We would hear a lot of teachers in CLIL classrooms going, very good, well done, to praise students. Stop it, to scold them. Or my personal favorite, true story, do you want to shut up, to tell them to be quiet, which is a direct translation of the Spanish queréis callaros, which obviously does not work in English, right? Also, at this point, non-native speakers were frowned upon as second-class citizens. Nay, the native speaker model was the way to go. We all wanted to sound like Brad Pitt. Now, I'm mentioning Brad Pitt as an example of a native speaker, obviously because he's gorgeous, right? but also because I was a visiting professor in Brazil for 2 months, and oh my God, one day, this one student came up to me and said, Marisa, I want to learn to speak English to sound like Brad Pitt. And I thought, oh my God, good luck with that. Not gonna happen, right? At this point, third deficiency is, as I mentioned previously, we had quite compromised and limited research, no homogeneity between treatment and comparison groups, lack of longitudinal focus, no factoring in of intervening variables, focus only on the L2, not on the effects of CLIL on the L1 or content teaching, and the role of our mother tongue in itself was problematized because it was forbidden, right? God forbid we should use Spanish in the CLIL classroom. There was a functional compartmentalization of the L1 and the L2, which were kept completely separate. What's the story now 20 plus years in terms of CLIL implementation and research? Well, happy to report that the insufficient language proficiency is increasingly being addressed. Very recent research, as you can see from 2024, has found that a key success factor for CLIL programs is both the teachers and the students' language level. So it's being pushed up in many places to a minimum of a C1, no longer B1, thank God. We're also increasing extramural exposure to the language through, for example, Netflix. And we have made conspicuous efforts to update and upscale our teachers' language through what we call Real English, right? We set up el proyecto RECLIL, Real English for CLIL, which has led to many courses and a publication where we try to raise awareness in our CLIL teachers that they need to constantly refresh their English. All living languages are constantly evolving, right? There's Real English, there's Real French, there's Real Spanish, but English, being a lingua franca, changes particularly fast. For example, to say something like wonderful, in English, if you watch a Cary Grant movie in the 50s, you will hear swell. In the 80s, when I was studying at the American School of The Hague, we were all going around saying, oh my God, that's so rad, from radical. Hugh Grant popularized excellent in British English in the 90s. And now, we were saying awesome, sick, dope, or according to my niece, who's my greatest source of Real English, lit is the way to go. Lituation is a really cool situation. Although she was in Granada just a couple of weeks ago and she said, Tita, nobody's saying lit anymore. Now everyone's saying insane, okay? In Spanish, it would be brutal. I don't know in French what. Hallucinant, génial, je ne sais pas. So it's constantly evolving, and the same applies for the classroom. So we try and get teachers to use other expressions to praise their students in addition to well done, very good. You guys, way to go, stellar work. Or to scold them, come on, you guys, knock it off, give it a rest. To be quiet, never ever, do you want to shut up? Hush, keep it down. So we've designed a glossary of over 300 Real English expressions for the classroom. Like, awesome work, you guys. Collocations instead of much better, eh? Your composition is way better. Phrasal verbs, I know we hate them with a passion, but they're constantly popping up in the English language. So, okay, class, to wrap up today's session, lexical chunks to upgrade our teachers' language, like instead of, what do you think? What's your take on this issue, guys? And acronyms, which the students love, especially if they're bad words. And sounds like, to say you're welcome. Because I don't know if you're aware, but we're increasingly not using you're welcome, because it's kind of like saying, yeah, I deserve to be thanked. So we're toning it down with, absolutely, you bet, no worries, And we've also designed a fresh batch of activities to work on all these expressions in order to overcome what I call the it's raining cats and dogs syndrome, right? We need to stop wasting our precious time teaching expressions that nobody ever uses, right? So if you're interested at all in these activities to use a Real English expression, give me a shout, and I'll be happy to send them your way in a PDF document. Okay, what about the native speaker model? Still Brad Pitt? Well, I'm happy to say that situation is also changing thanks to another acronym, ELF, English as a Lingua Franca, which acknowledges the increased ownership of non-native speakers of the English language. So we also have a say in the way it's evolving. We no longer want to sound like Brad Pitt. Now we want to sound more like Sergio Ramos. Now, I don't know, I'm exaggerating, okay, to make a point. I don't know if there are any soccer fans out there. Anybody? Okay, just a couple. I'm a Real Madrid hooligan, okay? Sergio, who comes from Sevilla in the south of Spain, where I live, he was our captain for a while. I know he was in Paris Saint-Germain afterwards. And I remember one year, he was really harshly criticized because he recorded a Merry Christmas message in English with his Sevilla accent. But I follow this guy on social media, and he communicates in a perfectly understandable English. That's the way to go. So in fact, the latest companion volume of the Sefer no longer talks of the native speaker, but rather of the competent speaker of the target language. So while we do want our vocabulary to be as upgraded as possible, accent snobbery is on its way out, right? No more Queen's English, as we were saying yesterday in the first plenary. We should feel proud of our accent. It reflects our identity, our culture, our nationality, as long, of course, as we're understandable, okay? And, we've made great headway in terms of research. Now we have an ample and robust evidence base, which matches control and experimental groups, which has a longitudinal focus, which not only factors in different variables, it also carries out discriminant analyses to determine which ones are responsible for the differences ascertained, and where the L1 is also a prime focus. And this research base for the L2 and the L1 has amply evidenced that all the linguistic components and skills in the L1 and the L2 are positively impacted by CLIL. CLIL streams outstrip their non-CLIL counterparts already at the end of primary, and these outcomes are sustained and reinforced at the end of secondary and baccalaureate. So it takes time for CLIL to take root and for its effects to be observed. And the role of the L1 in and of itself has also changed. No more guilt complex. It's okay to use it from time to time, thanks to the advent of translanguaging. In fact, the latest research has evidenced that using the L1 can be enriching for low proficiency students. It does not negatively affect their learning of content, and it can be a lifeline if it's used purposefully and strategically. So in the future, we're going to want to explore the effects of that translanguaging in CLIL classrooms. They've been explored quite a bit in the States, not so much in Europe. We also, according to Morton, want to extend the scope to trans-semiotizing, which ties in with a multimodal turn in CLIL research, which also bears in mind a wider range of meaning-making resources, and not just the L1 and the L2. The impact of extramural exposure is another hot research area, because there are studies in Sweden now by Sylvan and Sundqvist, which are finding that children's exposure to English beyond the classroom is also generating very high language levels. And finally, the time is also ripe to carry out meta-analyses. We have so many individual studies that now it would be interesting to carry out an overall analysis to see whether the same patterns are discerned or a completely new picture transpires. So, exciting avenues ahead on that front. And let me now turn to the second main issue on the agenda, which involves methodology. The methodology in CLIL was also quite harshly criticized. I remember coming across this Facebook post by Pablo Ruiz. By the way, my niece also tells me Facebook is for old people. I have no idea who Pablo Ruiz is, but I took a screenshot because, you know, he criticized bilingual education and called for CLIL-free schools on the basis of this reason, that it's anti-pedagogical. And many people do consider that there is a rift between theory and practice. There's a lot of lip service being paid to the student-centeredness and innovation inherent in CLIL methodology, but it doesn't actually trickle down to on-the-ground practice, yeah? And it is true that initial research found that teacher-frontedness still finds traction in CLIL classrooms, especially, paradoxically, in the language classroom, not so much in the content one. So we do see a lot of bulimic learning, as I call it at work. Have you guys experienced bulimic learning? My goodness, I had this huge culture shock when I came back from the States to Spain. I mean, we would just sit there and have the teacher talk at us, and we would take notes and memorize and regurgitate and then forget everything. So it was conspicuous. Materials were also a thorny issue because they lack quality, availability, adaptability. They were traditional, static, printed. They did not factor in attention to diversity. And teachers felt daunted by the challenge of having to create or adapt them themselves, right? They were left to their own devices. So now, 20 years in, the solid empirical evidence we have points to the fact, luckily, that student-centeredness is increasingly embedded in CLIL classrooms with a host of methodologies like those that you have on screen, from cooperative learning to the flipped classroom. There's increased collaboration amongst teachers. Evaluation is also more diversified, and CLIL is entailing a thorough methodological overhaul. The theory is gradually becoming a practical reality. And as regards materials, we're now also ascertaining new traits of CLIL materials. They're digital, they're increasingly interactive, multimodal, transdisciplinary, project-based, tiered level. In fact, some of the materials we have designed for one of our projects focus on the same contents, but with differentiated activities for 3 different levels of achievers, according to Bloom's taxonomy. And I've gone ahead and included an example from Germany of those materials in an info pack that I've drawn up for you. I'll give you the QR code at the end to make sure you stay, okay? You can download it. And so the future lies in reinforcing that materials design and, hey, exploring the effects of new methodologies, challenging ones which are popping up like AI, right? Where there are many exciting avenues because the field is wide open for examination. The third hot topic I call the one-size-fits-all conundrum. In Spanish, it would be el café para todos, right? Initially, we started out with CLIL following the one-size-fits-all model, yeah? There was café para todos. In fact, in El País, I'm sure you're familiar with El País, it's like one of our classic newspapers in Spain. I remember there was an article a few years back which reported on a study carried out in Madrid with the first cohort of CLIL students in 2005, according to which they didn't learn content as well as their monolingual peers, especially if they were socioeconomically disadvantaged. And the author said these results can be extrapolated to any other monolingual context. Broca claimed the same in an article in ELT Journal. She worked with 5 schools in Sevilla, and she said, but these results are applicable across the board. I'm sorry, no. This is not the case. What's going down in Madrid in 2005 is not the same as what's happening in Austria in 2024. In fact, I have a friend who's a secondary school physical education teacher in a bilingual high school in Malaga. And I remember one day we were talking about this and he said, Marisa, if your results are positive and these people's are negative, alguien miente, somebody's lying. And I told him, no, Danny, nobody's lying. What holds true in one context at one point in time might not pervade subsequently, right? So what we need to do is maintain a context-sensitive stance on CLIL. And this contextual adequacy was also mentioned by Professor Smith yesterday because, you know, CLIL is very much a contextual phenomenon, and we need to base decisions on needs that are relevant to us in our specific context. Luckily, now, we've got the instruments to diagnose those needs. We have validated questionnaires which tap into all the curricular and organizational aspects of CLIL. We've got interview and observation protocols. We've got templates that have been designed by the British Council. I've included them in the info pack as well. And, you know, the future lies in using them to replicate, to repeat these studies in our context so we make relevant decisions to our specific scenario. And let's focus on us for a sec, shall we, in this fourth hot topic, teacher education. We started out, well, pretty dismally, to be honest with you. Teachers only had to accredit a certain language level, B1, in order to be able to teach through CLIL. At best, there was a crash course in what was known as a year 0 for preparation, which was then eliminated, and they had nothing at all. The courses that did exist were pretty hit or miss because they were based on what experts thought teachers would need, not on needs analyses. And there was a generalized lack of information on CLIL. In fact, I remember going into a lot of CLIL schools to investigate, and I would go in and say, oh my God, hey, so how's CLIL going over here? And they would say, what? You know, they were supposedly teaching CLIL, and they didn't even know what the acronym stood for. We also, at this point, did not know the competencies which a good CLIL teacher should exhibit. And people were just legitimately concerned with learning the language to be able to participate in a CLIL program. It was a sine qua non. And many of them were thrown out to teach in a sink or swim situation. So now, luckily, we've made headway in that we have both international and Spanish, national on the right-hand side, proposals, which have allowed us to distill the 7 key competencies which the ideal CLIL teacher should have. We've also made great progress in research on teacher training. We started out with these really local studies with very reduced samples, with no intervening variables, and we've transitioned to macro studies with thousands of respondents across geographical areas, meta-analyses, which allow us to glean a much more updated picture of how this is working. Plus, certain research projects like NULT have designed questionnaires in order to tap into the main teacher training needs. These questionnaires, which I've also included in the info pack, have allowed us to carry out needs analysis of teacher requirements to implement CLIL. And on the basis of those outcomes, we have articulated specific training proposals, like this master's degree that we have at my university in Córdoba, 100% online. Its structure and contents are based not on what we thought teachers would need, but on what over 5,000 European teachers told us they needed to step up to the challenge of CLIL successfully. So teacher training in the future needs to figure prominently still on the CLIL agenda. We're at this perfect moment to gauge the impact which those training initiatives are having at the grassroots level, right? The transformative potential of research, as we were saying yesterday in Josephine's talk. And we also need to tailor our courses to real needs, following, ideally, according to the latest research, a 3-pronged structure. Little bit of theory, lots of practice, methodology, scaffolding, evaluation, and materials design. And in order to help teachers know what good CLIL teaching looks like, we're also in need of setting up quality assessment frameworks. I remember in TESOL, Atlanta, a few years back, I was talking to a colleague from the University of Colorado, Boulder, and she said, Marissa, CLIL teaching is plain old good teaching. And I said, Carol, I couldn't agree more. But what does good CLIL teaching entail, right? Initially, we really did not know because there was this controversy at these 3 levels. And at the level of implementation, there were those who said, CLIL is too broad a term. It's too much of an umbrella term. It encompasses too many approaches for it to be able to evolve coherently. Versus others who said, no, 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 no. Precisely the fact that it's flexible can help us accommodate its adequate implementation across contexts. So at this point, we really did not have a consensus on what good CLIL looks like. Now, well, yeah, we're making progress. We're kind of, zooming into those traits that are characteristic of successful CLIL. For example, through the quality assessment framework set up in the Netherlands, I think it's one of the very best we have. Our Spanish Bilingual Association has also outlined a series of traits that a good CLIL school should have. The British Council has set up a self-evaluation tool also for their schools. We've also published a framework of success factors for CLIL programs with 2 types, 7 factors, 22 indicators at 3 levels in your info packs. But you know what? Truth be told, none of these proposals have empirically validated the indicators. So we need to distill those factors that characterize good CLIL practice for those teachers that are starting out and they say, okay, this is what I should be doing, and for schools who are also implementing it. And if they meet those criteria, they can get a quality seal. But we need to empirically validate them. I'm happy to report we're on it, okay? Through this project here, OSCE, One Stop CLIL Europe, and also working with David Marsh, so stay tuned because they're coming, okay? Now, this next aspect, I have to confess, is one of my favorites. Because CLIL has been so harshly criticized because it's elitist and it segregates. I could bring you a million quotes from those newspaper articles that I mentioned. It's considered to be an elitist nightmare, to evince a brutal classism, to be an excuse for segregation. If we look at when we started out in CLIL, there was a grain of truth in this, because in order to participate in a CLIL program across Europe, there was overt streaming. Students had to evince subject knowledge or language level or both. And in countries like Spain, where there were no admission criteria, there was covert streaming through what Lorenzo et al. Termed self-selection, which was bolstered by social class and parental choice. So we had in the same school 2 groups, the CLIL and the non-CLIL stream. And where do you think the best learners went? The CLIL stream, the most intelligent, the most motivated, the most linguistically proficient. So yeah, there is an element of elitism inherent in CLIL at the outset of its implementation. We're also finding it now in contexts that are just starting out on CLIL implementation, like Brazil or Colombia. So it might just be something we need to come to terms with. And as regards diversity, things are not looking that great either, because now we're trying to mainstream CLIL to make it for all. And in fact, for example, in Andalusia, we no longer have CLIL and non-CLIL streams. If a school is bilingual, it's bilingual for everyone. And some experts have said that this is not just a challenge. It could jeopardize everything we have achieved in CLIL so far. As one of the teachers we polled said, el bilingüismo murió cuando fue para todo el mundo. Bilingual education died the day it was for everyone. And this is because we lack a theoretical framework on what diversity is in CLIL, lack of conceptualization. Teachers feel daunted by the dearth of materials. They're very vague pedagogical tips to accommodate differentiation, and teacher training needs are high across the board, and satisfaction with support systems is very low. So yeah, we need to rethink the whole CLIL program issue if we want it to be for everyone. So, we're on it. We're on it. I think this is an area where we've also made conspicuous advances. Let me share them with you. From 7 years ago, give or take, we have an amazingly solid research base. And interestingly, all these studies are finding 3 clear-cut patterns which are repeated again and again. So they're emerging trends. The first is that the best students are no longer in the CLIL groups. Hundreds of randomly selected schools have compared CLIL and non-CLIL streams, as you can see, on intelligence, motivation, English level, and look at that. Not a single statistically significant difference. So CLIL and non-CLIL groups are increasingly homogeneous. Second trend, I love it. Great news. CLIL is leveling the playing field. It's eliminating differences in terms of rural-urban context, socioeconomic status, private and public schools, which pervade in monolingual contexts, but not in CLIL. And in fact, the latest research has also looked into why this is the case. And 3 main reasons have been ascertained. First, it seems CLIL students have a sense of pride, of belonging to a special group, so they're more responsible. Second, they're more used to not having their parents be able to help them with homework, so they're more autonomous. And third, teachers are aware of the increased cognitive challenge inherent in CLIL, so they provide more accessible language-sensitive teaching. And finally, CLIL has been found to work even in the most disenfranchised contexts. Even in public rural high schools with socioeconomically deprived areas, with a majority of gypsy ethnicity in Spain, for example. And very recent research has found that when comparing how CLIL works with low, mid, and high-level achievers, if attention to diversity is factored in, it can work with everyone. So in this sense, what we need to do is set in place measures to cater for diversity. And this is what we've done also through 4 projects encompassed within the ARDAA umbrella, Attention to Diversity in Bilingual Education. We've done 7 main things. We've set up that theoretical framework that we were lacking. We call it DD. It's not a sophisticated name. It's just because, we capitalize on diversity, inclusion, differentiation, and integration. And essentially what we've done is update the notion of diversity to the new bilingual scenario. Diversity is not just special education. It's not students with severe learning difficulties. It's students with different language levels, with different content levels, with different paces, learning styles, socioeconomic backgrounds. If you're interested, it's included. DD is included in this special issue of the International Journal of Bilingual Education, and it's also in your info packs. We've equally designed and validated 3 sets of instruments, questionnaires, interviews, observation protocols for teachers to carry out a personalized diagnosis of their main training needs for diversity, info packs as well. And we've designed those pedagogical guidelines that we were lacking. We call them the ARDAA principles, which should underpin materials and lesson design in your info packs as well. And we've gone digital. Any TikTokers here? No? Well, we've tried, to do our best to come up with TikTok-ish videos, couple of minutes long, where key experts in the field provide clear-cut solutions to some of the challenges in diversity in CLIL. And we've also implemented courses where we try and encourage teachers from different European countries to share their best practices in catering for diversity. We've designed those materials that are tiered level that I shared with you before, and that framework of key success factors for inclusive bilingual education. And everything I've mentioned is freely accessible on our webpage at ardaaproject.com. So check it out if it's something you might be interested in. So in the future, we clearly need to stop harping on this whole elitism segregation issue and instead set in place measures that will cater to diversity for everyone, carrying out specific SWOT analyses which focus on diversity, gauging the impact of CLIL no longer by homogenizing, but rather by trichotomizing students in different levels of achievers, and delving deeper into why CLIL is having that leveler effect, right? Beyond the research data. So, how you doing? You doing okay? We're nearing the end, yes? Okay. Well, I'm sure you've heard of this word, the 7th key hot topic. Pluraliteracies, ring a bell? Very hot topic. It has to do with a very thorny issue in CLIL. How do you integrate the language and the content, right? The IPCK. This has always been very daunting, and we started out by separating the BICS and the CALP, the language for interaction and the specialized language for the classroom. And we tried to see, why is CLIL working? Because of more meaningful content-based teaching or because of more focus on form? So we followed an either-or stance, which was quite reductive or inaccurate, and which led to a situation that I witnessed in a 6th grade primary classroom in Granada. The students were able to reel off the parts of the electric juice blender and the washing machine in English, but they couldn't ask their classmate to borrow a pen in English. So what is the point, right? So evaluation was also separated in terms of language and content, according them different weight. Now, luckily, thanks to pluriliteracies, we are fostering a conflation of conceptual and communicative aspects from a more integrative stance, while concomitantly favoring a systemic functional approach to evaluation. In fact, SFL is considered the way to go to integrate language and content. And in this sense, if you're interested in the topic, there's amazing work being done in Austria, in 2 different universities in Madrid, and also in Japan, in terms of pedagogical integration and evaluation of content and language at the same time. So the future lies in first, conceptualizing PCK, so teachers know exactly what integration entails, providing them with guidelines to do so, and designing and validating tests that measure language and content at the same time and applying them to obtain a more updated and reliable picture of how CLIL is working. We also need to extend CLIL programs because you know what? CLIL is for the long haul. As I mentioned before, the full effects of CLIL can be ascertained with time. So it's been pretty much firmly ingrained initially in primary, secondary, and baccalaureate, which are like the 2 pre-university years. But now the onus is on extending it to pre-primary, tertiary, vocational training, and why not? Taking the leap to plurilingual schools. In Andalusia, we now have schools that teach CLIL in French and in English. So I would say that in pre-primary, we're making headway. There's a strong research group in Granada. They have their conference in September. They have a yearly conference on this and lots of publications. So now the onus is more on tertiary education, where the equivalent of CLIL is EMI, English as a medium of instruction. And EMI, according to the latest research, is still at an embryonic stage compared to CLIL, because there's a lack of language policy, accreditation criteria, quality assurance, and of a top-down push to harmonize practices. So we're working upon this through the wonderful European Universities Initiative. Yesterday, I think it was Pascal who mentioned that the Sorbonne was also part of a University Alliance. Macron came up with this term back in 2017, precisely at a speech here in Paris at the Sorbonne. The idea is that now the future of European university is no longer in isolated institutions, but in creating networks, alliances, consortia of universities that share common traits to create a single multi-campus higher education institution. Jaén, my university, is proud to lead Neoleia, which is one of these European alliances. As you know, Neoleia in Greek means youth. We're very young, but invested in our regions, universities, and we span the whole of Europe, as you can see, from north to south and east to west. And through Neoleia, what we've done is design instruments in order to determine our teachers' and students' needs for EMI. And we've also mapped our language policy initiatives, and this has led to a white paper on language policy, which proposes 70 concrete lines of action for teachers, students, and admin staff, hinging on these three main pillars, and where we vouch for a common, official, harmonized, and explicit language policy for our institutions. We're also setting up an accreditation certificate for multilingual education. Any teacher who wants to teach in English at our universities is going to need to take these 5 modules, 20 hours each one, 100 hours of training to ensure they are well versed with CLIL and EMI. And we're also increasing the numbers of subjects, strands, and degrees taught in English while trying to orchestrate a balance also with plurilingual education. And in this sense, the latest research has found that these bilingual strands are working beautifully in terms of language content and motivation. So hopefully through these actions, these programs will flourish and we will have a top-down accredited and sustainable EMI program at our universities. So the future lies in ensuring these initiatives take root. And why not conducting research into the full effects of combined bilingual programs, because many of the students reaching university now have been taking CLIL since primary. So it's a great moment to carry out a longitudinal study into its effects. And now we're nearing the end. Let me share with you a very Spanish phenomenon in this 9th hot topic. We call it ombliguismo, which is, in English, it would be navel gazing. In Spain, we're very ombliguistas. We look at what we do in our class, in our subject, in our degree, in our faculty. So we've mainly conducted local studies, on CLIL. In fact, reviews of research, many of which are from Spain, have found that they're very, very local. And we just tried initially to distill those features that made CLIL different from everything else, following a very reductionist stance. Now, especially since 2015, we're leaning towards a more integrative stance because all bilingual approaches, immersion, a dual language, CLIL, are considered labels for the same reality. So we should increase research at the supranational level. And this is what is being done through studies that compare how diversity in CLIL is working across 6 European countries. There are even studies now on worldwide trends in bilingual education. We've just launched a brand new research group, Iceberg, on international comparative bilingual research, where we hope that we explore this cross-fertilization between different multilingual contexts, because now is the perfect time to do so and to learn from each other in terms of our research results. And finally, we need to go from the lab to the public. And let me share with you a second very Spanish phenomenon. As we say in Spain, Spain is different. This is our slogan for tourism. but I think it beautifully applies to CLIL because we are different, and hey, proudly so, because we are very conspicuous in terms of CLIL implementation, research, and diversity sensitiveness. But on the downside, we're also conspicuous for what I call el fenómeno del cuñadismo. In English, it would be brother-in-lawism. Does anyone here have a Spanish brother-in-law? Oh my, so sorry. You know, our cuñados, I don't know if this is an urban legend or a hard and fast fact. Our cuñados in Spain, they know about everything. It doesn't matter what topic you bring up over Christmas dinner. Oh my God, they know about it. And hey, their opinion is the right one. And the same is happening with CLIL. In Spain, everybody, doesn't matter if they've never implemented it or read on it or researched into it, everybody has an opinion on CLIL, which they don't hesitate to share because they believe it's the right one. This, of course, has a scientific name, okay? It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Basically, the less you know about something, the more you think you know. And this is dangerous because it's spurring on a whole bunch of false myths, which are being fueled by newspaper articles, blogs, social media posts, the national television, even by political decisions. In Madrid, last year, they decided to stop teaching history and geography in English, based on no empirical data whatsoever, simply politically, right? So we hear this whole bunch of false myths around CLIL, like it waters down content learning. There has been no evaluation, it segregates, you know? And I'm kind of sick and tired of this. I feel like I'm stuck on Groundhog Day because I remember back in 2016, I gave a plenary on debunking false CLIL myths. And I finished and I thought, my job here is done. You know, now no more false misconceptions. My job was not even beginning. I mean, 10 years later, we're still harping on the same issues and they're snowballing, right? So what we're doing now is trying to determine why this is happening. Basically, I think that if you repeat something long enough, this negative narrative is contagious. And you wind up believing it. So we need to go from the lab to the public, make sure everyone is informed on research outcomes in layman's terms, so that we prevent this snowballing of misconceptions and ensure that we're all interconnected, right? Everybody, primary, secondary, tertiary, the administration are informed of how CLIL is working. So what we're also doing at this point is trying to fight back. For example, through the OSCE project I mentioned before, we've written up a position paper, info pack, on the most common CLIL myths in layman's terms, explaining them, debunking them, extracting the major takeaways, and signposting ways forward. We're also fostering knowledge transfer to society by going out to schools in our research group and talking to the parents and the students and the teachers to make sure they know what CLIL is and how it's working. We're also envisaging more aggressive pushback on social media, because on X, the critics are very vocal. Maybe we should be as well. We've also contested political decisions, sending out empirical data to Madrid. Happy to say they've backtracked slightly, and some schools are teaching geography in English again, and making sure that the ministry and the regional authorities are also informed about research. In fact, now I'm working with the British Council to determine how their secondary program is working across Spain. And next month, we're meeting up with the ministry and the regional authorities to tell them the data and the takeaways. We need to continue setting up teacher training and stepping up our standards, C1 minimum, and create those truly international networks like Iceberg, yeah? So it's on us to usher in that fifth C, and in doing so, we clearly need to continue engaging in solid empirical research and ensure that that is our compass for the future. So, to use a real English phrasal verb, let's wrap this up, shall we? Let me now toss this back to you. I have 4 questions for you, just 4, only 4. Are you ready? Okay, so after these 45 minutes together, are you aware that we have made progress in CLIL research and practice and training? Is everything peachy? Of course not. And we've signposted ways forward that we clearly need to continue acting upon. But are you more aware of the exciting new directions in which CLIL is moving? Have you got more ideas for research at this point? And most importantly, are you ready to tackle them and to answer the uninformed haters? Well, then my job here really is done. Yeah, you know, bring it on. Bon courage y a coger el toro por los cuernos, to grab the bull by the horns. And to finish, I just want to share with you the only takeaway of the entire talk. At the beginning, I started quoting the great Bob Dylan, and I'm going to come back full circle quoting the great Taylor Swift. Yeah. As she says in one of her songs, haters gonna hate, 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 but as she said in that very same song, we gotta shake it off, yeah? We gotta ensure we're not cuñados, but are guided by research, and we're not Pollyannas or Scrooges, but possibilists. And to those cuñados and Scrooges and Pablo Ruizes of the world, I say, in Prensky's terms, it's high time to stop their grousing, and as the Nike motto says, just do it. And in doing it, sometimes it's necessary, as we have done here today, and as they say in French, il faut quelquefois reculer pour mieux sauter. We got to take a step back in order to acquire the impulse that gets us through the finish line by looking back to move forward. And that impulse in our case should come from a realization that we've got what it takes to make sure that metaphorical CLIL train stays on track. So safe journey. Hope to meet you on one of its wagons again at some point in time. And until then, un grand merci. It's been insane to work with you. Thank you so much. At your disposal.
Thank you very much. You've been insane.
Merci bien.
So just letting time for colleagues to get the QR code. Do you have any questions? I'm sure you do.
I wanted to know if the secret of your energy and excellence is in the info pack.
Oh, well, you'll have to scan the QR code to find out. Thank you so much, Josephine. I am a believer, you can tell.
Thank you very much, Mary Luisa. In France, we have a big problem with teacher shortage and not having enough people interested in teaching. Is it the same in Spain, I suspect?
It is indeed. In fact, that is why initial requirements were so low. It was only a B1 level, because to get it rolling, we had a really important top-down push for CLIL from the government, and to simply get the program rolling, there was such a shortage that requirements were minimum. So it is indeed the case. And CLIL implementation has always outpaced teacher provision and teacher training, unfortunately. We're still trying to catch up.
Is there an effort by universities to get, because in Europe it's often government funded, is there an effort to get legislators to understand that we need the funding and that we're missing out on candidates, excellent candidates, because at the end of the day, if you're a bright young person and you can't pay your rent, you can't buy your food, you don't see a future, then sorry, I'm not going to go teach. So efforts to get funding?
Yeah, from universities, definitely. Well, especially we're trying to contribute through training, including CLIL at pre-service and also in-service level through master's degrees. But I think in this respect, I think we are relatively lucky in Spain, because there has been a very solid investment, top-down, from the government in CLIL programs. So there has been funding, not just for teachers, and there are incentives. They have extra salary. They have, for example, teaching rebates if they're in CLIL programs. So there is interest on the part of teachers to participate in CLIL programs because of those incentives. And there's also been quite a lot of investment in language assistants, who have become also key figures in the success of these programs. So in Spain, we're relatively lucky. But in any case, from universities, oh, we're pushing hard to keep this show on the road. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for your talk. I wonder concerning, you mentioned factfulness, you mentioned questionnaires, and you mentioned assessments. Is there something like assessment in education as compared to healthcare? Assessment in healthcare, there's a lot. There's a World Health Organization. Is there a World Education Organization?
Oh, that would be awesome. That would be insane. This is precisely this worldwide connection is what we're vouching for through Iceberg to carry out international comparative research. Thus far, we only have evaluations at more local or national level. It is true that there have been plenty of evaluations, solid, commissioned to university researchers by the governments, but they're mainly local, which is this contextual aspect that I mentioned we still have to make headway on. So we are on it, hopefully through initiatives like Iceberg, but we still need to step it up. And that'll be the day when we have solid data, which is comparable across contexts that can help us make true decisions. Thank you for that suggestion, indeed.
Yeah, so thank you for the, it is kind of a meta-analysis already. But I am troubled because involved in teacher training in France and also working with the Inspection and more recently with the Inspection Générale and currently in France. So for me, I get troubled because like Richard Smith, I don't believe in, the miracle answers to the complexity of foreign language learning and teaching with learners of any age. And I worry always that there is this kind of belief around CLIL, mystical belief, et cetera. And I understand that you're trying to say, no, there is science behind it. But at some point it becomes, oh, if we could just implement CLIL, all our problems would be solved. And I'm really uncomfortable with that kind of perspective. And I see it before my very eyes in France. There's been a lot of difficulty with implementing language learning in the primary schools, right? This started back in 1990. And the French system has had an incredibly difficult time getting it right. Because of lack of resources, financial resources, teacher training, etc. And they've recently decided that the answer to all of these problems is to do CLIL. And as a professional in foreign language teaching theory, etc., I say, well, it's the most difficult thing to implement properly, requires a higher level, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm troubled to see, as this is becoming the miracle response, it's not necessarily well implemented. Certain countries are ready to recommit all the errors that were committed in, that you detail for Spain 20 years ago, but other countries are implementing them now. And I find it troubling because it's this miraculous discourse that characterizes foreign language teaching methodology. If we only did CLIL, all our problems will be solved. And I really think that's dangerous discourse.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think there is a miracle at all in language teaching. There's no panacea. There's no single method. I think CLIL is certainly not the solution to all our problems. I think it's definitely the solution to a major problem that we've had in contexts like Spain. We have been at the bottom rung of the foreign language knowledge ladder together with the UK forever. So it is true that we're now seeing CLIL with its additional meaningful exposure to the language. We have the 300-hour benchmark, according to research. We need more exposure to the language. CLIL is a natural way of doing that. It's simply going to raise our language standards. But as I said here, not even to native-like levels. We just want to have a functional language competence. In Spain, people from my generation, I'm in my 40s, they don't speak a word of English. I mean, they can only ask for a beer, maybe at best, when they go to England. We're trying to solve this and make sure that they can simply communicate, get by, work, and study abroad. I think that's the realistic expectation. And one of the problems with CLIL is that we have very high expectations. We expect that it's, as you were saying, the solution to everything, that our students are going to be perfectly balanced bilinguals. It's not the case. We're simply seeking to raise language standards to a functional, non-native level so they can get by, and at the same time to update and refresh our methodologies, because bulimic learning still finds traction in places like Spain. So 2 birds with 1 stone, but hey, with our feet firmly on the ground.
Thank you very much. It's been awesome. Insane.
Un grand merci.
So the sessions are starting.